Hello, today we are going to be taking a look at the MD-82 by Leonardo in Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's known as the Mad Dog by the people who fly this aircraft. It's one of the first study level aircraft in the simulator, therefore it's fairly complex. Thankfully Leonardo have helped us out a lot. If you've got this aircraft, it comes with a load manager application that can synchronize with the simulator, that can configure the aircraft to behave how you want it to. And it has some starting configurations in the load manager, one of which is cold and dark, another of which is ready for takeoff. The cold and dark setting is not as cold and dark as you'd imagine. A lot of the switches around the cockpit have already been set to their kind of normal positions. They're not all in their off positions, which helps us tremendously and shortcuts our startup routine enormously. So let's go and get inside and see what we need to do. While we're looking around the aircraft, we are going to be using the shortcut keys to control the views. So I will invariably say them on the way around the cockpit. So for example, Control and 6 on the keyboard is a preset view of the overhead panel. Control and 1 is the co-pilot. Control and 5 is the back of the pedestal. So we can navigate around very quickly using the control keys. So Control and 6 goes to the overhead panel. The first thing we need to do is go to the APU section, which is in the center, and we need to turn the battery to on. Now the battery is hidden underneath the switch. It does say BAT under there. If we click on BAT, it switches it to on. If we roll the mouse wheel on BAT a second time, you can see that the switch has rotated through 90 degrees and locked itself in place, so we can't accidentally switch the batteries off. Next thing we do is go to the ENG section on the bottom left of this panel. So here's ENG, and we're going to turn the start pump to on. So this start pump is going to be used to fire up the auxiliary power unit. So back on the auxiliary power unit section, we can go to master and move it down to start. We wait for the needle to start moving here. So this is the percentage of RPM of the APU. So it's moving, and we can then move it back to run. Now it's started. If we go and look outside, the APU, the auxiliary power unit, is a small jet engine in the rear of the aircraft. So if we listen carefully, you can hear that whine. So the APU is used to provide electrical power to the aircraft and compressed air to spin up the gas turbine engines. So we're just waiting for it to come up. When it gets up to speed, you will see the crossfeed light over here light up, saying that we can cross over power for the aircraft to the APU. So it provides the electric for the systems. So we'll do that now. So that's next on our list, is to set the master. We've done the master to start. We're going to change the APU L bus and APU R bus to on. So this is APU L bus and APU R bus. So you can see suddenly things are coming to life and booting up around the aircraft, and we've got a whole host of warnings have popped up. That's normal. Don't worry about that. Okay. Now we're going to go down to where the pilot sits. This is normally where you would go and program your flight management computer and the FMC. So by FMC, so flight management computer's down here. We haven't actually powered it up yet. There we go, it's booted up now. It takes a while. And the MCP, or master control panel, for the autopilot is up here. Now this comes into play later. If you don't do these, I'm not going to do them today. If you don't do these, when you try and fly the aircraft, you're going to get a load of warnings about altitudes and all kinds of things. So to prevent at least the altitude warning, what we can do is tell the MCP we're flying to a given height and pull the altitude knob to arm it. But we're not going to worry too much about that in this flight. That'll be another video which will be much longer about programming flights. Okay, we need to turn on the flight directors. So if you look on either side of the cockpit, you can't quite see them from here easily. Oh yeah, sorry. There's the switches right there. I'm thinking of a different aircraft. There you go, there's the flight directors. So they have put the magenta lines on the attitude indicators. So back on the co-pilot side of the cockpit, we need to look at the glare shield on the right and turn the anti-collision lights to on. So the reason for doing this is just to tell the ground crew, we're in here, we're powering up the aircraft, you know, be careful. The next thing we do is turn on the hydraulic pumps. They're down the bottom, down here, and we need to turn the trans switch on and the auxiliary switch to on. Next thing, on the airspeed indicator, and you can do this on either side of the cockpit, we need to click on these markers and it will pre-configure the V-speeds for the aircraft in its current fuel loading state. So if you were going to set the fuel up for a given route, you would do that before you get started. But there you go. So if you just click on the markers and it sets up the V-speeds so that you'll get the annunciations as you're rolling down the runway with rotate and all the rest of it. Pilot side again. We are going to uncage the standby attitude indicator. So we pull the knob on it and it goes so far and we let go. And we pull the knob on it again and it goes the rest of the way. Then at the pedestal at the back, we're going to press Control 5 to get there. We need to switch TCAS to TARA. So TCAS is up here. Again, this is not entirely correct procedure. You wouldn't go straight for TARA. We're shortcutting here. And we're going to open the pneumatic crossfeed valves. These are these two levers here. Without these, we don't get any air pressure reaching the engines when we want to spin them up in a few moments. So at the front of the pedestal, we're going to press Control 4 to get there. We're going to adjust the trim. So we're going to bring these in line with each other. We can move this by pulling this lever. And the aircraft makes noises. It barks, as they call it. So don't worry about the noise. That's absolutely normal. When you're adjusting the trim on an MD-82, the trim adjuster makes an awful noise. And that's fine. Okay, back to the overhead panel. Fuel tank section at the bottom left. It's here. We are going to turn on the pumps for the fuel tanks we're going to be using. So typically in Flight Simulator, when you load in, the center tanks are empty. So we're not going to bother with the center pumps. But obviously if you're doing a long flight and you have filled the tanks up, you're going to turn on the center tanks as well. APU section back in the center. APU air goes to on. So this is what's called APU bleed in lots of other aircraft. So it's just air, in APU air in the MD-82. So that's allowing the air pressure generated by the auxiliary power unit to get to the engines through those crossfeed valves that we've just switched on. We now press the PNEU press in the engine section. So back in the engine section. Oh, sorry, we're checking the PNEU press, not pressing it. We want to make sure that needle is greater than 4. The reason it might not be is if you've gone and turned the air conditioning packs on, for example, or something like that, and then it would have dropped back down. So we haven't done that, so we've got more than 4. We need more than 4 on the pneumatic pressure for the engines to spin up. So that's absolutely fine. Okay, in the lights at the far bottom left, we can see them here. We want to turn on the seatbelt sign and arm the emergency lights. Air conditioning on the right, we're going to change the supply to auto. So this goes to auto. Oops. Now, look what's happened. This is a good example to show you the effect of doing that. By putting the supply to auto, we have reduced the pressure, so we can't start the engines. So that's kind of why I did that, just to illustrate that. So I talked about packs, that's really what we're talking about there. Back on the co-pilot panel, so we press Control and 1 to go back to the co-pilot. We're going to change the positional strobe lights to position. So that's the knob here, or switch here on the corner. So this indicates when we go and turn on the lights, we can look outside. We will now have the lights on the ends of the wings. So it's basically saying we're getting closer to starting the engines, and that's exactly what we're going to do next. So go back to the overhead view. Engines. We turn the ignition knob to both, which is that way. Yeah, there's system A, system B and both. We can use both. Typically in normal operation they use A or B and they alternate them, but we use both. Start R to down. Okay, so start valve is open. So the air pressure now is spinning the engine up. If we switch back quickly to F, to the main pilot view, you can see the percentage coming up on the N2, which is the gas turbine. That will get to about 22-23%. So what we need to do when it gets there is move the starter lever over here to allow the fuel into the engine. See, it's stabilising out at about 23%. If we then slide the starter lever forwards, suddenly that goes, the fuel's got in, the exhaust gas temperature, the fuel's ignited, the temperature's going up, and the turbofan speed is increasing now as well. So a gearbox has kicked in between the gas turbine and the turbofan. So if you look carefully at the engines, you can't see it as easily here, but there's actually two parts to the engine. So there you go, you've got N2 and N1. So when the engine stabilises, which it should do fairly soon, just leave it going there. It takes a while. So around about 56-57% usually. We can go back overhead to control 6 to get the overhead view, and we can reseat that switch and put the cage back on it, and we can undo the left one, flick the switch down, and we can go back to the front view with F, and we can look down. We can see the numbers coming up. It will come up towards about 20%. Remember, at 20% we can slide the starter in, or the allow fuel into the engine. So it's coming up to 20. We slide the starter. So this is very similar to lots of the Boeings and things like that. So it will carry on past. So exhaust gas temperature is raising, N1 speed is coming up, and again it will stabilise at around about 56% at idle. Okay, so control 6 to get a nice view of the overhead panel. So we have started both engines. So once that is started, we can recage. So we can now turn the start pump to off. We can now turn the ignition to off. And in the APU power section we can turn L bus and R bus to off. But before we do that, we need to go and switch these switches to on. So we are going to cross feed at this point over to using the engines. Yeah, actually no, it's automatic. What am I talking about? So there you go, we can just turn the APU L and R bus to off. I'm getting confused between different aircraft there. At the same point we can turn the APU air off, which we use the mouse wheel to do, and we can turn the master to off for the APU. So the auxiliary power unit is now completely shut down. It takes it a little while to spin down, but it will do eventually. And we can turn the start pump to off. We've already done that. So I'm just looking through my notes here. I'm reading this from a checklist, by the way, which I'm going to make available to download. So in the APU section, air to off, master to off, we've done that. Ice protect, pitot to capped. So we've got the ice protection down here, and we need to turn the pitot knob to capped. Yep. So that's all done, and we are basically now at this point ready to taxi. So if we go and look on the screens, we should find the only warning we have listed anymore is the parking brakes are on. So to release the parking brakes, we push the plunger on the tiller for the parking brake. So there's the tiller which steers the aircraft. If we push that and release parking brake on my controller as well, you can hear the APU spinning down now. You can also see the heat haze behind the engines now. So if we were to gently move the throttles forwards at this point, the aircraft starts rolling. So you're basically ready to fly. So I'll just put the brakes back on and put the parking brake back on. So that's it. We've just done the entire startup procedure for the MD-82. I apologise for the slight mistakes here and there where I confused this aircraft for other ones, but I'll make the startup checklist available. Oh, just a point of interest here. The master caution is on. It doesn't switch itself off when you've got everything ready, so you do have to go and disable that light. So it's happy to switch itself on. It doesn't disable itself. So there we go. That is the startup sequence for the MD-82 in Flight Simulator from cold and dark. It's not as bad as it could have been because there's a lot of switches that have been pre-configured. Just as a point of interest before I stop recording, there's a lot more to this in terms of setting up the flight management computer and the master control panel for the autopilot. We're not going to do that in this video because, again, whole other subject. Also, you will notice there's various bits of electronic gadgetry that have been retrofitted to the aircraft, such as these displays. The navigation display you can control with the panel over here on the left of the pilot. So you can change the modes, and you can see that changing down there, and you can change the range. Yeah. So that makes much more sense once you've got a flight programmed in, and you'll see that moving during flight. But otherwise, that's the basics of getting the aircraft up and running. Okay, hope you enjoyed that, and I'll catch you again soon. Okay, I'll stop recording there.